Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a hero nor a battle, but with something much colder, something quieter, something that lingers not in the textbooks, but in the frost between bones. You're going to spend the night as a medieval peasant, not in the castle, not in the warmth of myth, but in a damp little cottage with fleas in your straw, smoke in your lungs, and frost nipping at your feet. Forget what you thought you knew about the Middle Ages. Tonight isn't about knights and kings. It's about survival, about what it took to make it through one of the coldest nights, with nothing but rags, grit, and silence. But don't worry, you won't have to live it for real. Not really. This is just one more slow journey into boring history for sleep, told the way only a sleepy historian would dare tell it. Quietly, patiently, truthfully. So if this kind of history to fall asleep to speaks to you, take a second to like the video and subscribe to History for Sleeping. It's free, but it helps more than you know. And feel free to let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? It's always oddly comforting to know who else is out there, drifting off, beneath the same sky. Now dim the lights, maybe pull your blanket just a little higher, and let's begin tonight's slow, cold journey together. You are there, inside a house of earthen walls and a thatched roof, tucked quietly into a desolate countryside of medieval Europe. No wheels on stone, no light through windows, no glass to hold the wind at bay. Just dried mud, wattle and daub, and a dampness that has seeped into every surface, including your own skin. Outside, night is closing in. The sun has long since slipped away, but its light still clings to the bare trees, as if reluctant to leave. The wind doesn't howl, it whispers, persistent. It slips through every wooden crack, weaves through the roof's straw, and finally settles at the back of your neck. Not sharp, but enough to make you shiver. Inside, the silence feels heavy. Only breath remains. The low glow of embers in the hearth. The soft rustle of cloth as someone shifts beneath a dirty blanket. And your heartbeat, steady but tired. This isn't the first night you've faced the cold. And it won't be the last. You lie there, curled into a mat of straw crushed to dust by too many winters. A coarse cloth wraps around your body, sour with old sweat, kitchen smoke, dampness, and dust, all blending into the scent of survival. Every breath you take pulls cold air deep into your lungs and sends it back up in a small cough. Not the flu, not a fever, just cold. So cold your lungs can't keep up. So cold you have to remind yourself, if you're still breathing, you're still alive. Around you are other bodies, family, the elderly, children, sometimes even animals, all of them breathing. And if you listen long enough, you'll know. There is no true silence. Always a raspy breath from an old man, a sniffle, a soft groan as someone rolls over. Life, pressed down, but still pulsing. No mattress, no pillow, only earth and straw. Every time you shift, your skin scrapes against the stalks, leaving lines of raw sting. But you don't complain. Complaining wastes strength and disturbs the others. Above you, the thatched roof does nothing to block the wind. And if it rains tonight, water will seep through the cracks. You know this. Last year, your sibling burned with fever after a night of rain dripping onto their neck. No one in the village remembers their name. But you do. Your feet have gone numb, cold, stiff. They no longer know straw from floor. You bury them between layers of cloth, hoping the warmth from your belly might spread downward. But nothing changes. The cold here is not something you fight. It is something you endure. In the dark, you feel your own breath. Warm, then cold, then fading into the air. The only rhythm still within your control. In the corner, the hearth has faded low. Smoke still lingers, caught in your hair, your shirt, your skin. No one puts the fire out. But no one adds wood either. Wood is too precious. Measured twig by twig, gathered in early autumn, dried for weeks. To burn it at night is a luxury, a risk. But without it, the old won't survive the night. You think of tomorrow. There's nothing to look forward to. Just the same. Wake early, stoke the fire, search the cellar for leftover turnips, boil water, mend a shirt, scoop dung, scrub cloth in a stream half frozen. But tonight you only need to last through it. Just once more, like all the times before. Not triumph, not glory. Just an hour and a half more, maybe 2, until the first light peeks through the cracks in the straw door. You can't remember the first winter you were cold, but you remember clearly the first time you understood no one is coming to save you. No lullaby, no warm bed, no feathered quilt, only you and your own breath. That's how the night begins, in cold, in scent, in silence, and in the fragile hope that there will be a morning. And if not, at least you're ready not to be surprised. Your bed is not really a bed, at least not in the way modern people use the word. It's just a shallow patch of compacted earth, sunken from years of bodies sleeping in the same place, covered by a thin layer of straw, and a few scraps of burlap so worn it's impossible to tell which side is up. No mattress, no springs, no concept of privacy. You sleep directly on the floor, a packed dirt surface, plastered with mud and straw, unrepaired for years, peeling into fine dust that clings to your hair, your neck, your teeth. Straw was meant to insulate, but once it has rotted through a winter, it doesn't hold warmth anymore. It holds scent, the smell of people, of animals, of stray chicken droppings, and of time compressed into a layer of dust with taste. You do not sleep alone. No one of your class has that kind of luxury. Sleep is communal. It's how warmth is kept, how space is saved, how safety is shared. You lie beside your kin, shoulder to shoulder, back to back, sometimes calves overlapping, just to make room. On your left is your sibling, on your right your mother, at your feet the dog. And in the far corner, less than an arm's length away, a small chicken coop. An upturned basket over a few branches, lined with straw to keep the eggs from cracking. The stink is everywhere, but you no longer notice. Your nose has lived in it too long, it only registers changes, like the smell of wet dirt tracked in from the yard, or decaying leaves smeared on a sleeve, or a basin of soured milk knocked over in the night. Sometimes a chicken murmurs softly, then goes quiet. Maybe from cold, maybe from a rat. Rats are permanent, silent residents of the house. They walk the rafters at night, drop tiny pellets from above, and burrow into the straw in search of crumbs. You're used to something crawling across your chest at midnight. If it doesn't bite, you don't wake up. Bedbugs are different. They never show themselves during the day. But once the body heat rises through the straw, they wake. You don't see them. You just wake with itchy bumps on your wrists that aren't from mosquitoes. There are no mosquitoes this time of year. You've tried catching them. It's pointless. They hide in every crack, every fold of fabric. Someone once brought back an herbal fumigant from another village, but everyone in the house coughed for 3 days. In the end, you live with the bugs, the same way you live with the wind. Not removed, only tolerated. A winter night is a string of small noises, the wheezing breath of an elder, the shuffle of a sleepwalking child, a soft groan as the cold draws muscles tight, the rustle of someone trying to pull the cloth back over their shoulders. You have one coat. It's stiff with dried sweat, dirt, and soot. You don't wash it. You can't. Because after washing, there would be nothing left to wear. Winter has no space for wet clothes. That coat is your blanket, your bed, your wall, the only layer between your skin and the world. You hug it close, wrap it around your neck, block the draft from the door. Each night is a negotiation between your body and the conditions of sleep. In the dull ache of your back, the itching from lice, the sense that you're living at the bottom of some damp hole. And sometimes, in dreams. Dreams of a real bed. Though you're not sure you've ever seen one, some mornings you wake and find the dog has pressed itself against your belly. It shivers. You shiver. You hold it. Not out of love, but for warmth. In moments like that, feelings lose their names. Only instinct remains. You don't remember the last time you truly slept. Sleep here is not continuous. It comes in fragments. Sleep, cold, wake, turn, sleep again. And sometimes, not at all. Just closed eyes, letting your mind drift a little away from the present. Your mother once said, "Deep sleep is for the rich." When you asked why, she only said, "Because they don't have to watch the fire." You think of that whenever you wake in the dark and smell cold ash, and know it's your turn to rise, breathe life back into the coals, make sure they don't die. You don't let the fire go out. Not because of the cold, but because if someone dies tonight, they'll say it was your fault, because you let the embers fade. In this world, sleep is not a need, it's a test. And your bed is not a place to rest. It is simply where you go to stop standing. The fire is the only heart of the house, not in the warm, poetic sense we use today, but in the literal one. If the fire dies, everything grows cold. If everything grows cold, people die. In a house of rough timber or earthen walls, there is no insulation, no sealed windows, no built-in fireplace. Only a shallow pit in the center of the floor, its edges lined with stone, gray ash below, glowing coals on top. That is the stove, the heater, the place for boiling porridge, baking bread, heating water, drying clothes, and breathing. You don't breathe near the door. The wind cuts through the cracks. You don't breathe in the corners. Damp and cold. Like everyone in your family, you curl around the fire, pulling in whatever scraps of warmth remain, like animals returning to a nest. The fire doesn't burn through the night. Wood is far too precious to burn constantly. So you learn to bank the embers, a humble technique, but a vital one. At the end of the night, after the last pot of porridge has been cleared, after everyone has wrapped themselves in blankets or coats, you're the one who reaches into the fire, removes the last glowing sticks, and covers them with a thick layer of ash. Not to extinguish, only to sleep. The coals remain warm underneath, no flames, no light, but just enough heat to be stirred back to life by morning. They call it fire banking, like placing fire in a vault to be withdrawn when needed. Except if the fire is lost overnight, you can't borrow it back. You'll have to spark it from scratch or go begging from a neighbor, across wind, through fog, beneath darkness. The keeper of the fire is often the elder, or the oldest child. Everyone takes their turn. You have too. The first time your hands shook with fear. Because if you made a mistake, you wouldn't just make the house cold. You'd be blamed if someone caught chill, or didn't wake at all. Keeping the fire isn't just about banking ash. You have to know where the wind slips in, how thick to lay the ash, not so heavy that it suffocates, not so thin that the cinders scatter. You have to know how to shift the ash to one side, leave a small opening, just enough for the fire to breathe through the night, without smothering. Even so, sometimes it chokes. The house is small, with no chimney. Smoke clings to the ceiling, to your clothes, to your lungs. Some mornings you wake with a raw throat, stinging eyes, a pounding head like claws behind your skull. That's the night someone stirred the coals too deep. The fire didn't light, it smoked. No one says anything. Everyone knows. But no one blames. Because tending the fire is a duty no one wants. and everyone has borne. You remember the nights the fire went out, the house colder than stone. Your mother dipped a comb in sheep tallow, lit it, tried to spark the coals, but it wasn't enough. You had to go outside, cross the yard, reach the cattle shed, to fetch straw. Your bare feet sunk into frozen mud, every step cracking like ice beneath your skin. Some nights, the only light left came from a single ember, tucked beneath the ash, red like a cat's eye. Everyone slept quickly, shivering, not daring to breathe too hard, for fear of snuffing it out. In many villages, firekeeping is done in shifts, 3 watches per night, early, middle, near dawn. Each person takes a turn. Not everyone does it right. Some fall asleep, some pretend. But some, like you, rise, rake the ash, breathe the smoke, then crawl back beneath the stiff, soot-drenched cloth for a few more moments of half-dream. The smoke lives on your body. Your hair is never clean. Your fingernails stay black all season. Your coat, hung by the hearth, stiffens from smoke and grease. But you don't feel dirty, because everything around you is the same. Some nights you look into the ash pit and see a kind of forest inside it, the blackened sticks like scorched tree trunks, the drifting ash like fog, and the scattering sparks like fireflies under the earth. A forest of illusion glowing in the belly of the house. You used to dream of living in a forest, a place where no one had to keep a fire, where there was eternal light, warmth rising straight from the ground. No watchers, no blame. But every morning you'd wake with stinging eyes from the smoke, and you'd know there is only one forest, and it is this fire. People tell stories of villages burned in the night, just because one child blew too hard on the coals. The flames caught the straw caught the walls, the wind caught the roof, and by dawn, the whole town was ash. So you're always careful. You learned that not from words, but from the way people look at fire, with fear and with thanks. You never laugh near the hearth. That flame, though small, can save you from freezing, but it can also kill you in your sleep. And then, when morning begins to rise, when the hens begin to stir, you rake back the ash, and the ember is still there. You kept the fire. No one praises you, no one mentions it. But in the silence, you know the fire lives. And so do you. The cold of a medieval winter never comes alone. It brings with it closeness, sharing, and a kind of intimacy that cannot be avoided. In a tiny earthen house, no one has a private room. No bedrooms, no bunk beds, no concept of personal space. The whole family, 7, 8, sometimes 10 people, lies pressed together on the dirt floor, over straw or old blankets, like a cluster of small animals hiding from frost in a shallow cave. And the first thing you learn in winter is that warmth doesn't come from the fire. It comes from people. The human body gives off heat, even just a little. But when many bodies press close, that heat becomes life itself. A hug, not for affection, but for survival. You're placed between 2 older siblings. Mother lies on the outside, shielding the wind. The youngest, wrapped in old clothes, is tucked against your sister's belly. Your father, if he's still alive, sleeps near the door so he can wake to tend the fire. Sometimes you hear him coughing in the dark, hear the straw shift as he turns, trying to block the draft with his own back. No one sleeps alone. Sleeping alone means being cold. Being cold means getting sick, and sickness means death. The animals don't sleep outside either. The hens are put in a basket in the corner. The old dog curls up by your mother's feet. Piglets, if there are any, are placed in a crate, covered with burlap. They stink, but it's a familiar stink. Blended with smoke, sweat, and rotting straw, the smell becomes something both unpleasant and safe, like a blanket shaped by its age. No one complains. Each night is a quiet puzzle of bodies. Who sleeps where? who gets cold easily, who kicks in their sleep, who needs to be closer to the stove, all considered with the care of an unspoken military plan. Sometimes you wake in the night, your arm pinned under someone's back, or overwhelmed by the reek of animal fur. But you don't get up. You just shift quietly, pull your knees in, try to find a new patch of warmth. Not everyone has a blanket, but everyone has a body, and the body is the final shelter against the cold. On the coldest nights, sleep is shared in shifts. Some sleep first, some stay awake to watch the fire. Some just sit and wait for their turn. No one wants to wake the others, but if you sleep too long and hog space, someone might gently clear their throat near your ear or bump your shoulder, without a word. Everything is adjusted in silence. No shouting, no whining. The only sound is breathing, steady, layered, deep. You once asked your mother why no one builds more beds. She didn't answer. Because a bed, even if you had one, would be useless without someone next to you. You once saw a neighbor die of cold, even though he had a bed to himself, but no one to share it, no one to pass him warmth. Some villages sleep in circles, children in the center, women around them, men at the edge, each with their own posture, but all facing inward, like petals folded in the wind. Sleep is a ritual, too. Before the fire is banked for the night, someone usually murmurs a quiet blessing, not spoken aloud, but exhaled like shaped breath. Let everyone wake up. You don't remember the first time someone didn't. Just that one morning they were still lying there, back cold, eyes closed. No one cried. Your mother just pulled a cloth over their face and returned to stoking the fire. The cold doesn't stop at the skin. It seeps into your heart, into your bones. But maybe that's why people press so close together. Your hands have gone numb before, your feet turned purple. But when you lay beside your sister, you began to feel warm again. When the cat climbed onto your chest, your breath evened out. When your little brother cried from the cold in the night, you pulled him into your arms and knew that your skin, your breath, was the only thing keeping him here for one more night. No one says it aloud, but everyone knows. Sleep is not rest. It's a battle. And in the dark, there is no weapon stronger than the silent embrace of someone shivering just like you. You don't change clothes to go to sleep. You wear the same clothes you've worn all day, and sometimes all month. Not out of laziness, but because taking them off means freezing to death. Linen, wool, leather, layer upon layer, wrapped like tree bark. Underneath, your skin has grown used to the stifling warmth, the itching, and the strange sensation of dried sweat fused with crusted mud. Wearing 5 or 6 layers is normal. A base shirt of worn linen, a wool tunic with patches at the shoulders. Over that, a heavy sheepskin coat, still carrying the smell of fat from butchering. And on the outside, a dark cloak to shield you and to make the cold hesitate, if it knows fear. Your hands are wrapped in rags, not gloves, just old cloth, folded again and again around your wrists and fingers. Sometimes those scraps were once part of a burial shroud, washed and reused. Not out of disrespect, but because nothing could be wasted. Your feet are in wool socks, stuffed with dry grass for insulation. Rough leather shoes, worn thin, soaked through, but still better than bare feet. The children are often tucked into old burlap sacks tied at the waist, barefoot or bundled in scraps, as long as the skin doesn't turn blue. And then, the nose cloth. It's the last thing you adjust before sleep. A long strip of linen wrapped around your neck, pulled up over your mouth and nose, leaving only your eyes. Not to hide your face, but to keep your breath from escaping. Each exhale moistens the cloth, and by morning it will stiffen, cold as stone. but you can still breathe, and that means you're still alive. No one washes clothes regularly in winter. The water is knife cold. There's no sun to dry them. Wet clothing is a death sentence. So people wear things until the garments stand up by themselves when taken off. Body odor is not shameful. It's a sign of life. You can smell the smoke trapped in your coat, the pork fat rubbed into your hands to keep them from cracking, the damp scent of goat skin, and the human smell, strong, heavy, and clinging longer than memory. The dirt-caked fabric is your first defense. It holds heat better than clean cloth. Old sweat forms a thick barrier, a strange insulation, like the layer of earth packed around potatoes in the coals. Dirty, but warm. And warm means alive. Some homes even mix ash and fat to rub on their faces. It stinks, but it seals in moisture. Children get pork fat smeared around their ears to stop them from freezing. Ears falling off from cold isn't a legend. It happens, without warning. You once saw someone lose 3 toes, not to injury, but to wet boots. 3 nights of sleeping in cold damp was enough. No one cried. They just wrapped the foot in rags, walked slower. But they lived. The collar, the sleeves, the belt line, they gather the most. Soil, sweat, and the remains of many days. But you don't feel disgust. What makes you shiver is wind, snow, the dark when no one's tending the fire. Some nights you wake up itching. Maybe lice, maybe straw mites, maybe just dry, cracked skin. But you don't scratch. You just turn over, burrow deeper into your clothes, hands pressed between belly and thighs, searching for the last bit of warmth left. In all that harshness, you learn to love what little you have. The nosecloth was once your mother's shirt, the wool coat, once your grandfather's blanket, and the innermost layer, so faded it has no color, is the only thing keeping the wind from touching your skin tonight. You don't think about smelling good. You don't dream of being clean. You just want not to freeze. You just want to survive until morning. And that is enough. She has no name in the history books. No portrait remains. No one knows what her voice sounded like, high, low, or rough from the cold. But she once lived, and once fought the winter with her cracked, bleeding hands. You can call her whatever name you want. She could be your mother, your grandmother, or someone no one remembers. But because of her, someone survived long enough to create you. She was a woman of the Middle Ages, no land of her own, no books to learn from, no right to write her own story. She was the keeper of the fire, the keeper of the home, the one who helped the weakest make it through the night. Each day she rose before light, not for discipline, but because the fire had to be tended before it died completely. Smoke clung to her hair, ash soaked into her clothes. The children were still asleep, curled in straw, but she was already drawing water. Water cold as blades slicing into her palms. She didn't wash her face with it, just splashed it across the hearth to keep down the dust as she lit the fire again. No one called her a warrior, but she survived things not everyone did. Hunger, cold, pain, no medals, just new calluses, and the hair she lost after that first hard winter. No one taught her to be strong. There were no other options. Her morning began with scooping cow dung in the yard, bare-handed into a basket, to clean the ground, and to dry it into fuel. Fingertips split open, nail beds black from soot, no soap, no warm water. She cooked what she could. Turnip porridge, a scrap of black bread from yesterday, even dried potato peels saved from summer. She never ate first. She always served her husband, her children, her aging mother, then took the last bowl with the crust burned to the bottom. Sometimes she rested, but it was the kind of rest you do while sewing, mending a torn sleeve for a child growing too fast, darning socks, patching quilts. She stitched with a broken needle and thread spun from scrap wool. She didn't fear the cold. She feared the endless cough from the youngest child. The sound jolted her awake in the night. She'd grope in the dark for dried onion, mash it with warm ash, and press it to the child's chest. A remedy passed from mother to daughter, uncertain, but all she had. She never thought of what she did as something great. She only thought, what now? And then, what next? The man of the house, her husband, worked in silence too. He hauled wood, hunted, fixed the roof. But the one who kept the rhythm of the home was her. The one who knew which child had a fever, which turnip had gone soft, which wall had begun to let the wind in, was her. There were nights she never slept. Not because the baby cried, but because she heard the wind at the door and feared there wouldn't be enough wood by morning. She sat by the fire, banked the coals, brushed back the ash, eyes stinging from smoke, hands dry and red from the heat. But she didn't move. If the fire died, everyone would shiver. She once gave birth during the first snow of the season. No one helped, except an old neighbor woman and a wooden basin. The baby didn't cry loudly, but it was warm against her chest. And it lived. There was only one small cloth to wrap it in, so she tore her own shirt to make another layer. No one told that story. No one wrote it down. But she remembered. And the cold remembered too. They say women are weak, but women like her were the beams that held up the roof. She needed no recognition, no praise, just to make it through the night, just to keep one flame alive in a house full of wind. She wasn't a queen, she wasn't a saint, but if anyone ever deserved to be painted, to have her name carved in stone, perhaps it was her. The first child to wake is the 6-year-old girl, not from hunger, not because it's morning, but because her feet are stiff with cold, like stone. She sleeps between her 2 brothers, but in the night, the older one rolled away, and the younger one wet the bed. The only blanket had already gone damp. She doesn't cry. She just curls tighter, trying to tuck her little feet into the folds of her torn shirt. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. Her mother has been up for some time, drying a pair of cloth shoes over the ash pit. The scorched smell of ammonia rises from the wet fabric and urine meeting hot stones. The child says nothing. She crawls out of the straw nest quietly, tiptoes to her mother, and finds a spot with no smoke to sit. The cold has taught her silence, taught her how to endure, taught her not to disturb. In the corner lies an old woman, her grandmother. No one knows her age. People didn't count the years then the way we do now. Only that her back is bent like a bow, and her hands tremble with each beat. Each morning, the mother pours a little hot water into a chipped clay bottle, wraps it in straw, and places it in the old woman's lap. It doesn't stay warm for long, but just long enough to keep her hands from curling into fists of cold. Sometimes, the old woman coughs, dry, deep, dragging coughs that make the whole house pause, waiting for the next breath. The mother sits beside her, rubbing her back with calloused hands. She says nothing, just repeats the motion, like a lullaby, like a prayer. The little girl settles next to them, murmuring stray stories about the cat in the yard, about the dried carrot she found. Her voice is soft, steady, as if to distract from the trembling of a life slowly fading in the pale morning light. The mother doesn't ask if the old woman is all right, because if she's not, there's no medicine. Instead, she does what she can, reheats the porridge, scrapes the mold off old bread, boils stones to place in the old woman's bed before nightfall. Cold doesn't strike like wind or snow. It creeps slowly, like water dripping through stone, into bone. The children, full of life, still curl into their straw nests. The old, full of memory, are like the final leaves of winter, brittle, paper-thin, waiting for the gentlest breeze to let go. On the harshest nights, the mother places her daughter against her chest, her back turned toward the old woman. She lies in between, the living wall between future and past. The little girl has a pair of shoes made from goatskin, but the soles are worn thin, the lining exposed. Each time she steps outside, she treads lightly, so as not to feel the frozen stones beneath her feet. Her mother has packed them with scraps of cloth, layered with dry straw. The grandmother has no shoes left. She no longer goes outside. She only sits by the hearth, or lies on the earthen bed, under a patchwork of repaired blankets. When the frost is at its worst, the mother rubs old animal fat, already rancid, onto the old woman's chest and the child's palms. Not to warm them, but to drive out the cold, a folk belief passed through generations. The grandmother was once young. She, too, raised children through winters like these. She no longer remembers much, but her hand still finds her granddaughters in the dark. And the little girl knows the feeling of that hand, wrinkled, dry as tree roots, sliding gently through her hair each morning. In the small house, 3 generations live together and shiver together. No one chooses to be born in winter, but everyone must learn how to survive it. There are no lessons, no instructions, only watching, repeating, and hoping. One morning, the youngest boy doesn't wake. He hadn't cried. He hadn't burned with fever. He had simply slept, deep and quiet. The mother shakes him, then holds him, then trembles. The grandmother just watches. Her tears no longer come. The little girl hugs her wooden doll and quietly steps back. The mother doesn't scream, doesn't pound her fists, doesn't call his name. She simply wraps him in the finest cloth they have, lays him beside the hearth, and turns back to tend the fire. The cold does not weep, and neither does she, because there is still her mother, still her daughter, and the fire is not yet out. A few days later, the little girl rises even earlier. She arranges the straw, spreads ash on the floor, wipes her face with the warm cloth her mother left. She knows. Now she is the one who sleeps in the middle. The sun has not yet risen, but no one waits for sunlight to begin the day. In that village, the day starts with the first breath, cold, tired, and taken before fingers have even stretched from a night curled in decaying straw. The mother ties back her hair with a strip of worn cloth, then slips on the heavy wooden shoes her husband left behind before he died. They're far too big, but the ground is ice, and the gravel cuts like blades. The shoes are both shield and shackle. The grandmother is still asleep. The daughter, too. But the eldest son is already awake, digging in the corner for the rusted bucket. It's his turn to fetch water today. The well is only a few hundred steps away, but the journey is harder than any distance. Every step on frozen ground echoes with a dull thud. Not an echo, a warning from his feet that each landing is an injury. When he draws water, his hands go numb from the cold-soaked wood handle. The bucket, full or not, burns his bones with cold. Sometimes the water spills and freezes at the rim, forming a thin layer of ice he scrapes away with his fingernail. Back at home, the water is poured into a clay jar, but it's not drunk right away. It must be boiled, filtered through burlap, and rationed. Meanwhile, the mother is already cleaning waste. There are no enclosed stalls, no cement floors. The droppings of cows, pigs, and sometimes chickens fall just outside the door, seeping into the straw, the soil, the very air. But dung is not just waste. It's fuel, it's fertilizer, it's warm currency in the winter months. She uses a wooden shovel to gather the still warm piles into a basket. Each scoop sends up a mist, Not smoke, but steam from the fermenting mix. It's foul, it's wet, it clings, but it's valuable. The dung is mixed with broken straw, then laid out beside the house to dry. When hardened, it becomes dung cakes for burning. They smell terrible, but they are warm, and warmth is worth more than dignity. When she's finished, the mother washes her hands with fireplace ash, then picks up a needle and thread, a shoulder torn on an old tunic, a heel worn through on a sock, a blanket fraying at the edges. There is no new thread. She unravels it from ruined clothing, or twists fibers from flax bark. The needle is carved from fishbone, coarse, brittle, but sharp enough to pierce cloth when ground at the right angle. Her hands are cracked, the fingertips streaked with dried blood. But the needle still moves. The thread still winds. The clothing must be whole again, even if only for now. Inside, the youngest daughter helps at the hearth. She stands on a slanted plank to reach the pot, one hand steadying the rim, the other stirring with a smoke-blackened stick. The pot is dented, scorched at the base, but it's the most precious item in their small kitchen. When the porridge boils, she lowers the flame by sprinkling ash over the fire. A trick learned from her mother. Who learned it from hers? The meal is nothing more than thin oats, a few scraps of turnip, and a pinch of rock salt. But its heat spreads through the belly, driving out the cold, if only for a while. The grandmother is handed a bowl of hot water by her grandson. Her hands tremble, but she grips it tight, each sip a flicker of fire in her chest. She says nothing, only nods, and the boy bows his head in reply. No words needed. In the afternoon, the mother carries the freshly mended clothes outside, hangs them on a line, hoping the rare sunlight will dry the damp. But the fog rolls in. Nothing dries. She brings them back in and hangs them near the hearth. The house is thick with smell. Dung, ash, damp fabric, animal grease, and smoke. But no one complains. Everyone knows. As long as there is smell, there is life. When evening comes, they gather again near the fire. The grandmother tells stories from long ago, her voice broken, but her eyes still bright. The daughter gathers dry twigs. The son repairs the hooks for hanging tools. The mother rubs pig fat into her hands, then massages it into her children's feet. It keeps them warm, and it's the only way to stop her fingers from cracking and bleeding when the night drops below freezing. That day held nothing special, just another day, a day of labor in the cold, a day without rest. But surviving one more day, that too is a kind of victory. You hear it before you see it. A soft, thin sound, repeating like dry cloth brushing against wood. A cough, at the far end of the house. From her. Not harsh, not hurried, but drawn out like a thread that won't break. She's been coughing since yesterday, and the day before that. At first they thought it was the smoke. The fire burned wet that day, wood not dry enough, ash swirling in the air. But today, her voice is different, hoarse, as light as wind slipping through a cracked wall. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the mother is already by her side, touching her forehead. There's no thermometer, only a cold hand, and the old woman's skin, hot, damp, strangely wet. Fever. In this age, a fever is not a symptom. It's a sign, a vague warning that things may begin to turn. The house falls silent. The mother pours her a bowl of hot water, melts in a bit of lard to help it go down, and lifts her gently to sit. But she can't rise. Her body is heavy, not with fat, but with age, with winters unhealed, with wear never fully rested. A child asks, "Is Grandma okay?" The mother shakes her head. "Just tired. She'll get better." No one fully believes it, but everyone needs to. That whole day, the mother doesn't work outside. She stays close, adding another blanket, changing the damp cloth on her forehead, sprinkling ash around the hearth to hold the warmth, trying to cook a porridge thicker than usual. Thick porridge is a sign of hope, and hope is the rarest luxury in a poor home. Night falls. The old woman breathes in short, broken rasps. No moaning, no complaint, just an offbeat rhythm, like wind breaking against the winter dark. Everyone sleeps as they always do, because here, even when death is at the door, life must carry on. The little girl sleeps. She must gather kindling tomorrow. The boy sleeps. He must haul water. The mother lies awake, her eyes open in the dark, her hand resting on the old woman's belly, a final tether to the world. When dawn breaks, the house is still. The mother rises to light the fire. The flames catch, snapping softly. Warmth drifts out, but not enough. She turns back, steps to her side. She doesn't move. Her forehead, cold, her cheek, stiff, her mouth, slightly open as if she was about to say something but ran out of time. No tears, no scream, no ceremony. Just the mother, sitting, holding her hand, murmuring something no one hears. Outside, a rooster crows. The children wake. Life goes on. The mother doesn't speak to them. Not right away. She turns to the hearth, adds wood, and makes porridge. More lard, more salt. Everything the old woman used to like. And when the bowl is placed where she used to lie, cooling slowly, the children begin to understand. Burial does not look how you'd imagine. There is no coffin, no granite stone, only a shallow hole dug behind the house, where the ground is softer, less frozen. They use hoes, shovels, even hands. Each scoop splits more skin, but no one complains. Her body is wrapped in an old cloth, once a curtain, then a bedspread, and now the last fabric to touch her. No one cries aloud. Tears dry the mouth, weaken the head, drain strength, none of which they can spare. The mother sprinkles a ring of fireplace ash around the grave, the same way the old woman used to every morning to hold the heat inside the house. One last gesture, a wordless goodbye. The children watch. They don't fully understand. They only feel a hollow shape they can't name. When the dirt is filled back in, the smell rises. Damp, cold, mixed with manure, wood smoke, and loss. The mother says nothing for the rest of the day. She keeps working, patching pants, tending the fire, rubbing lard on her children's hands before bed. The next morning, the house is still dark. The wooden chair where the old woman sat, empty. But the fire is still lit. The porridge still boils. And a quiet laugh echoes when the daughter spills a spoonful of flour. The mother doesn't scold. She just smiles, a smile leaning more toward memory than joy. Death here is not an event. It arrives like a season, like the cold, like the mist. And those who survive keep going. That morning, nothing special happened. No melody signaled the hour. No one knocked at the door with good news. Just a pale light slipping through the animal hide draped over the doorway. A grayish yellow, not brilliant, but different from yesterday. Because it was real light, not just the glow of the hearth. She opened her eyes while the cold still lingered. The blanket, stitched from old burlap sacks, hung heavy with damp. Beside her were two children. One had drifted back to sleep after a nighttime hunger cry. The other was stirring, thumb in mouth. The mother sat up. Her back ached, her knees stiff, but her heart still beat. Her chest still rose against the cold air, and her eyes still opened. She was alive. And in this age, that was a victory. No audience, no medal. Just the act of stepping out of bed. Enough to earn that word. Outside, the frost had not yet lifted. The trees were soaked. The earth beneath her feet felt like it had drunk too much rain but still remained thirsty. She crept to the hearth, fingering through dry sticks carefully, trying not to make a sound. The fire caught, a soft rustle in the silence, the morning's first sound. Small but steady, like the heartbeat of the house. A hen murmured from the coop. A thin cat climbed the kitchen ledge, curled into the warm wood frame. The world began again. Only a little. The mother mixed barley flour with cold water, stirred it smooth, and set it on the fire. Nothing special. No spices. No milk. But enough to warm the belly. The children woke. One cried. One scratched at his scalp. No one remembered their dreams. And that was a mercy, because winter dreams were seldom kind. Each received a small bowl. They ate in silence. Outside, the sun had risen, though still hidden behind clouds. A sliver of light touched the threshold. Faint, tilted, but real. She watched it for a long time. By mid-morning she returned from the well, a bucket in hand. On the path, she saw fox tracks etched in the thin snow by the henhouse. It must have come in the night and gone. She poured water into the clay vessel, then used what was left to wash the youngest boy's face. Her hands were still coarse, cracked, but the water, cool and clean, was a luxury she had today. She stepped to the corner of the house, pulled down a scrap of old cloth, and began patching her daughter's coat. The fabric wasn't long enough, only enough to mend the back. Still, the girl smiled. And the mother smiled too, softly, not bright, but real. At noon, she placed a pinch of salt on the little shrine, a rough stone beside the window. No one told her to do it. No book had taught her. It was simply a habit, a way of saying, "I'm still here, I am grateful." On the shrine were a few dry grasses, a crust of bread from last week, and a blackened scrap of wood, once kept by her mother as a lucky charm. She didn't kneel. She didn't pray aloud. She simply stood there, one hand on her chest, eyes gently closed, and exhaled a long breath. That afternoon, the air softened a little. Still cold, but not skin-slicing like nights before. A sparrow landed on the roof, preened its feathers, and flew off. The mother stepped outside, gathered a few more sticks, and returned. Her steps were heavy, but sure. As night came, she lit the fire again, served the food again, tucked the blankets tight again. But this time, a small change. She brought out a dark cloth, kept carefully in a wooden chest. It was her mother's headscarf. She sat down, mended a small tear, and placed it over her own head. Not for warmth, but to remember. Tonight her mother was gone. But she was still here, like that fire, small, faint, but still burning. No one recorded her story. No chronicler noted how she patched sleeves, stirred porridge, kept the fire, cooled her fevered child's brow. No statue, no song. But she survived a winter's night, and that, in its quiet way, was a triumph. Imagine you are crouching beneath an old, weathered house in a layer of dark, damp earth, a small archaeological trowel gently scraping through centuries of dust. No machines, no harsh lights, only your breath, the dim gray morning light, and that first sensation when the blade brushes against something different. Not soil, softer, drier, a mat of old straw, broken down into mulch, woven together like a whisper from the 13th century. This is where it begins, where history isn't written in words, but in grass fibers, ash, and animal fat. Layers of survival, once buried, now surfacing like a weather map frozen in time. The first layer archaeologists often touch is straw, dry, crumbling, yet still fibrous. Straw was never just for stalls or fires. In winter, it was a lifeline, a cushion between the body and the frozen ground. People laid it beneath beds, spread it on floors, even packed it into walls to trap warmth. Some homes had walls 2 handspans thick. Inside, a mix of straw and mud, pressed firm and dried by time. From outside, no one could guess that wall was once a coat against the cold. Beneath the straw, there is sometimes rotted grass, once stuffed into shoes, tucked behind shirts, or layered beneath the floor. Dried grass was harvested in late autumn, then stored in lofts, away from damp. Come winter, it served as crude insulation, light, cheap, and easily replaced. But grass held moisture well. These archaeological layers often show signs of mildew, sometimes even ancient bacteria, traces of the long fight against cold and rot. Next comes the ash, fine, gray, and distinct. Ash is what remains of every fire, but it was also a clever material. People knew dry ash held heat and blocked cold rising from the ground. They packed it into clay jars, scattered it beneath bedding, ringed it around hearths, even stuffed it into sleeves or tucked it into leather pouches. In many excavated homes, ash forms pale rings, shadows of long-dead fires, traces of hands once knelt there, trembling in the snowlight, coaxing flame from cinders. And then there is fat, not solid, but dark yellow stains soaked deep into soil, clinging to scraps of fabric. Beef tallow, sheep fat, even horse grease, melted and rubbed into boots, sleeves, hands, and hair. Fat blocked wind, repelled water, and carried scent. Archaeologists often find bits of clothing with faded grease marks, still holding the scorched smell of smoke and human skin. For many medieval women, animal fat was an invisible coat, filthy but life-saving. Charcoal is also found here, though it's often mistaken for burnt dirt. But under a microscope, charcoal reveals itself, spongy wood grain, bearing the ghost of flames long gone. Charcoal warmed the hearth, but was also sewn into blankets, tucked under beds, or hidden in hand-warming pouches. In homes where the structure still stands, small hollows beneath the floor show where glowing coals once lay buried in ash, warming frozen toes. Finally, the fine dirt, soil that once was the floor, mixed with urine, spilled broth, wash water, and blood. Not clean, not pretty. But when examined closely, it holds porridge grains, bone fragments, thread, bits of flax husk, the quiet debris of daily life. It is the sediment of memory, a place where no one told stories, but stories remain nonetheless. Some researchers call these layers a thermal map of survival. They don't name names, they don't say who lived or died, but they speak of how people fought winter, not with steel, but with straw, not with miracles, but with grease, not with walls, but with warm ash beneath bare feet. And if you lean close to the earth and breathe softly, you may still catch it. A faint, musty trace, a wet echo, a heartbeat still pulsing in the soil. Though centuries have passed, nothing is preserved perfectly. Everything is fragmented, rotted, covered. But that's what makes it truer than any record. Because these layers do not lie. They simply remain, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. We cannot relive that winter. But through each layer of straw, ash, grass, fat, and soil, we can imagine every night was a battle, and every morning survived, a quiet miracle, buried deep, an unnamed victory. If you truly want to understand an era, close your eyes and smell, not look, not listen, but let the scent lead the way. Scent is never recorded in history books, but it's there, clinging to cloth, woven into hair, soaked into wood, lingering on stone. And in the winter world of the medieval peasant, scent wasn't just a consequence. It was a weapon, an invisible coat between the living and death. Imagine waking up in a low-roofed house with straw mud walls and no windows. Before your eyes even open, you already know where you are. No mistaking it. The smell of smoke, thick, steeped, and deep. Not the sweet smoke of incense wood, but the damp smolder of charcoal gone out overnight, ash packed into the hearth, and splinters of half-burned timber scattered across the floor. That smoke clung to every straw fiber, every patch of wool. And it wasn't just for heat. It sterilized, killed mold, masked rot. It let people survive without clean clothes, without baths, without even opening the door. That thick, layered odor formed a kind of natural disinfectant. One no one at the time had words for, but everyone understood. Step further, and you'd catch the scent of trash. Not plastic wrappers or paper boxes, organic waste, rotting turnip peels, wilted greens, cracked chicken bones, torn rags, soggy straw, animal fur, dried dung, all mixed together and shoved into a corner or buried in shallow dirt just outside the door. The smell is strong, sour, and vivid. But precisely because waste wasn't managed, it played an odd role. It formed a kind of olfactory buffer, masking human presence, deterring wild animals. That pile of refuse also bred insects, but in turn drew chickens, ducks, cats, creatures that nibbled away the lice, bugs, and rats that haunted the home. Then you'd notice the animals themselves, not just one, but many. Dogs, cats, pigs, chickens, sometimes goats, rabbits, even calves, depending on the home. They didn't stay in separate pens. They lived with people, breathed the same air, slept near the fire, curled under straw blankets, wet fur, warm dung, urine soaked into the floorboards, all blending into a dense, stubborn musk. But because of that, people didn't freeze. A pig was warmer than a coat. A dog pressed against your legs all night. In the dark, behind closed doors and falling snow, the breath and body scent of animals was proof that you were not alone. You'd smell damp. Not sharply, but as a constant layer. Mildew, soaked earthen walls, rotting straw, half-dry clothes, the scent of shoes stuffed with grass and worn for a week. The damp weighed down the lungs, but also taught the skin to live without cleanliness. To many in the Middle Ages, skin was not smooth. It crusted, cracked, stayed dirty, and still lived. Damp was winter's reminder. Comfort had long since died. Only survival remained. Near the hearth, another scent. Fat. Beef tallow, sheep grease, linseed oil, melted and rubbed into hands, cheeks, leather sleeves, warming stones. It was rich, oily, sometimes nauseating when heavy. But fat held heat. It sealed warmth into skin. Mixed with ash or salt ash, it became a crude anti-freeze balm. Some say they rubbed it into their nostrils to keep from freezing shut in sleep. And though it soaked into bedding, hair, pillows, no one complained, because fat meant survival. Then, the human scent, not perfume, but old sweat mingled with wool, damp feet, oily hair, dry mouths, soil under fingernails. When an entire family slept in one sealed space, their body scents built up. But the human body also gave off pheromones, bacteria, and warmth. Some historians suggest this shared body smell created a sense of family, a closeness, a unity, a kind of biological bond now lost between layers of perfume and deodorant. And finally, the smell of faith. Not sensed with the nose exactly, but it was there, in the waxy smoke of candles, the faint trace of holy incense, the holy water sprinkled on a window frame, the scorched leather of a half-burned prayer. When all other smells became too heavy, People reached for the scent of the sacred, a kind of spiritual detox against an unbearable world. They believed a single pure scent could soothe disaster, like a perfumed cloth placed under the pillow amid refuse and smoke. Historians of scent have said, the Middle Ages weren't dirtier than modern times, just dirty in a different way. And it was that way, pungent, layered, that let people survive the ruthless winter. If you're still awake, try to imagine yourself lying in that house. To your left, a damp dog. To your right, a grandmother wheezing in her sleep. At your feet, the hearth still smoldering in ash. In that air, every scent blends together. And strangely, they don't just disturb you, they keep you alive. The scent of smoke, the scent of filth, the scent of humanity, the scent of life. A silent symphony of survival. Not every great invention bears the name of a scientist. Not every life-saving tool is made of gleaming metal or appears in textbooks. Some inventions are nothing more than dry grass and mountain stones. Nameless things, quiet things. But night after night, they kept death from crossing the threshold in the cruelest winters. Imagine you are a medieval woman. Tonight, the wind slices through every patched crack in the wooden walls. The hearth is banked with ash, but no one's sure it will stay warm till morning. Your child is coughing. Your husband has just come in from the cattle shed, his hands frozen, his clothes soaked. And you need a miracle. But all you have in the house is a bin of hay and a few coarse stones by the fire. The hay box, what we'd now call a thermal cooker, is not a stove, doesn't glow, doesn't dazzle. But it is salvation. Essentially, it's a large box or chest, tightly packed with dry hay, straw, scraps of sheep's wool, or even old rags. In the middle, a space just wide enough for a pot. Once food has been brought to a boil, the pot is wrapped carefully in cloth, linen, or leaves, and nestled into the center of the hay. The box is sealed with more straw or a wooden lid. And then, everyone goes to sleep. The food no longer touches flame. But the hay holds heat remarkably, enough that the porridge is still warm by morning. Beans soften overnight. Sourdough rises from the gentle leftover steam. The hay box saves wood, spares you the need to sit by the fire at midnight, and, more than anything, keeps warmth in the home, because a slow-cooking pot radiates steady heat all night. On the bed, there's another invention, the hot stone. No one could count how many feet escaped frostbite thanks to a heavy rock, heated in the coals, wrapped in coarse fabric, and placed at the bottom of the bed. Stone holds heat longer than water. It doesn't spill. It won't burn if wrapped right. And it can be reused night after night. To the medieval peasant, a stone was a water heater in a world without electricity. Many families turned hot stones into ritual. Children were taught how to wrap them in wool. Grandmothers had small ones placed near their trembling hands. The sick lay between two, one at the head, one at the feet. In the frozen dark, light no longer mattered. But temperature, that was survival. Some even used scented stones, heated after being dipped in tallow or herbal oil. When set on the floorboards or wood planks by the bed, they gave off a faint fragrance and added a barrier against the cold. Not just warmth, but warmth with scent, like an invisible embrace. Together, the haybox and the hot stone were more than tools. They were symbols. Symbols of instinctive cleverness, of the survival skills of people with no patents, no laboratories, but children, elders, and responsibility. They watched, they repeated, they remembered what their mothers did, and they lived. Today, archaeologists digging through medieval homes have found ash layers, clusters of stones, wooden bins stained with decomposed hay, scorched cloth remnants, all hinting at a world without heaters, but filled with methods of keeping warm. Some homes even left behind simple diary lines. Put the porridge in the box, went to bed, it will be ready by morning. One line, but it held a life that understood thrift, patience, and love. You don't need an invention to survive. You need memory. You need to relearn what your mother once knew. You need to believe that a stone, if heated just right, can replace a furnace through the longest night. And you need to trust the things no one names. A box of hay, a mountain rock, an old cloth. And when you lie down, feet resting on a wool-wrapped hot stone, ears listening to the soft simmer of the porridge in the haybox by the hearth, you know that no matter how bitter the night becomes, you'll make it through. Not because you're strong, but because you've learned how to use what you have. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a kind of ingenuity no one celebrates. But it's also the reason you're still alive come morning. When the cold lays siege to everything, from the earth frozen solid to the breath thickening in the air, people needed more than warm clothes or a fire. They needed an invisible blanket, a layer of protection not woven from wool, but from belief. In the medieval world, where death crept silently through every crack in the wall, religion was not a choice. It was a need, like light, like hope, like a flickering candle in the thick dark of winter. When night fell and the cold began to seep into the bone, a woman in a small wattle house often did something familiar. She lit a candle before the small altar pressed into the earthen wall. Not to see, but to remind the spirits that this place was lived in, that someone here was praying, someone here was hoping for mercy. Beside the candle was a bowl of holy water, blessed by a priest, now used to sprinkle around the hearth, beneath the beds, or on the pillow of a sleeping child. That water was not warm, but it was a weapon against the cold of the soul, against the invisible dread that a wandering spirit might pass through and steal the last breath of someone in the dark. In some rural regions, people still hung small straw crosses above the windows. Some tied red string around the legs of their beds to ward off cold spirits. Some placed a piece of dried communion bread beneath the pillow, believing it would protect their dreams from fever. To modern eyes, these might seem like superstition, but in the dense dark and howling wind that crept through the walls, they were anchors, things to keep the mind from drifting into despair. Many families kept a winter night candle, a large taper meant to burn for hours, used only on the coldest nights of the year. Sometimes, just once a year, on the night they believed death walked freely. Its light could not warm the skin, but it warmed the heart enough to feel not alone. And then there was the prayer. No need for words, no need for form, just a whisper in the mind before closing one's eyes. Perhaps a line of Ave Maria, perhaps just, "Keep me." These words, like the last warmth drawn from the body, were quiet, fragile, yet somehow strong. In winter, priests traveling from village to village often left blessings on doorways, a chalk mark in the shape of a cross, or a charcoal smudge of holy sign. These symbols, beyond their spiritual meaning, also said this: you have not been forgotten. Even in the cold, even in poverty, even if your name never enters the pages of history, someone believes you are worth protecting. Religion in the medieval world wasn't separate from daily life. It wasn't just in churches. It was everywhere, in the faint scent of incense at dawn, in the lullabies that mumbled saints' names, in the echo of church bells ringing across a fogged village. Especially in winter, when no one could be sure they would wake come morning, faith became as essential as salt or dry wood. Archaeological records show belief embedded in the very structures of homes. A stone laid diagonally near the door to ward off evil. A wooden charm nailed above a mouse hole. a scrap of cloth with a saint's image sewn into the lining of a winter coat. Faith was worn on the body, scattered around the house, and breathed in with the air. In the harsh, unrelenting cold, there was no technology to lean on, but there was something unseen to trust. A simple belief. If I light this candle, if I sprinkle this water, if I say this prayer, then maybe, just maybe, the cold will step back. Death will not knock tonight. And by morning the sun might rise again. It was not a guarantee, but it was hope. And sometimes, in a medieval winter, hope was the only blanket left. A medieval peasant's home didn't feel like shelter. It wasn't a fortress, and it never looked sturdy. But it endured, through one winter after another. And somehow, the house itself knew how to mend. Not with stone or mortar, but with cow dung, straw, trembling hands, and the quiet memory of generations who had once survived before. The walls were often built using a method called wattle and daub, a frame of woven branches like willow, covered in layers of earth mixed with straw, cow dung, and sometimes even urine. It sounds crude, even filthy, but that was the shell that kept the cold at bay in a world of poverty. Once dried, it hardened like stone. But in the freeze, it cracked, and when it did, it was patched with the very same things it was made from: a handful of dung, some dry straw, and hands that knew what to do. Any crack was a threat. Cold didn't need a door, just a sliver. So the woman of the house watched every seam in the wall. When she saw even the smallest line split open, she would mix fresh mud, add a little ash or fat if she had it, and press it in with care. In the coldest corners she might patch with old cloth, torn shirts, or burlap scraps. Not for beauty, for survival. The roof was made of layered straw or reeds, stacked thick upon thick. Through the winters it grew damp, began to rot, and sometimes bits of it dropped onto the heads of those sitting by the fire. But no one replaced it. They simply added another layer, like adding another blanket to a body already chilled. Each winter, the roof grew heavier, but warmer too. Along the base of the walls, people packed old sacks, straw bundles, even cold ashes into the corners to block the wind that slithered across the dirt floor. There were no floorboards, no tiles, only hardened earth, slippery and bitter cold. But they scattered fresh straw over it, or even a layer of charcoal dust from the hearth to keep bare feet from freezing. Doors were just wooden slats nailed together, or sometimes just heavy cloth. But cloth couldn't stop the wind. So at night, they leaned whatever they had, stones, firewood, buckets of mud, against the bottom of the door. The wind howled outside, but inside, at least, it didn't stab straight into the chest. In many regions, villagers crafted makeshift windshields, small wooden screens with legs, placed beside beds to block the worst of the drafts. Not elegant like the folding screens of the nobility, but a shield, all the same, between the body and the winter. Some families hung old straw mats or torn cloth from the ceiling to create a kind of false loft, a low, enclosed space where heat could gather. Children often slept there, under the low roof, wrapped in straw and wall-thick air, as if buried in the warmest cocoon the family could make. As winter dragged on, the walls changed color, from pale beige to damp gray. Moss crept into corners. Mold quietly bloomed behind the bundles of straw. But no one cleaned it away. Each patch of green, each spot of rot, was proof that someone still breathed here, that the cold hadn't won. The house, crumbling, patched, was never called strong, but it was alive. It breathed with those who lived inside. It cracked when it froze, leaked when it rained, and groaned in the northern wind. And every time, it was mended again, with memory, with skills no one taught but everyone knew, passed hand to hand, repeated without words. And so, with each winter that passed, the house grew a little thicker, not just in straw or mud, but in memory, in endurance, in the quiet witness of countless bitter seasons. The house could not speak, but if it could, it might tell the stories no one wrote down. Of the night a baby nearly died from cold, of the storm that tore off the roof and left the family huddled together for 3 nights, of the crack beneath the altar, mended with fabric from an old wedding dress. And if you, the one listening now, could sit in that house, you wouldn't feel warm, but you would understand what it meant to survive, not with brick, but with hands and breath and stubbornness, with the way a tattered house still clings to life simply because it refuses to let go. A castle was never truly warm. Don't picture a cozy parlor with a glowing hearth, fur rugs, and a gentleman swirling wine by candlelight. Yes, there was wine. There was fire. Thick carpets, too. But the cold was still there. It slid between the stones, hid behind thick walls, and sometimes slipped quietly beneath velvet robes. Still, to endure winter in a castle was different. Unlike a peasant's soaking straw roof, castles were built of stone, thick, rough, imposing. There were no yawning cracks, no wind slipping through. And even that small barrier, that simple resistance to the night air, was enough to create a separate world. The floor was not frozen mud. It was stone or brick, sometimes covered in thick rugs of wool or sheepskin. These carpets weren't just for show. They were insulation, a soft shield to keep the feet from going numb the moment they touched the ground. And the bed, a canopy bed, a structure like a small room. Carved wooden posts, heavy curtains wrapped around, a tall mattress covered in furs. When the curtains were drawn, the body inside entered its own small climate, where heat clung and the cold struggled to enter. Beneath the bed, a layer of hot coals warmed the floor. The room had its own fireplace, sometimes kept lit all night with rare wood, black coal, oak, or scented timber brought from far away. Servants took shifts tending the fire, clearing ash, rekindling each time the flame began to die. Not everyone in the castle slept peacefully. Someone had to keep the fire alive. Nightlight came from oil lamps or beeswax candles. The glow was soft, golden, and clean, unlike the thick smoked tallow candles of common homes. Even fuel was a sign of division. While peasants scoured for dry twigs, the nobility had storerooms, men to chop wood, and dry spaces to preserve fuel through the frost. The food, too, was different. Not turnip porridge or stale bread. Noble winters meant cured meats, aged cheeses, strong drink, and slow-cooked stews with imported spices. Pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, not only for flavor, but to warm the body from within. Part folk medicine, part refined luxury. Their clothing was layers upon layers, wool, fur, velvet, stacked with care, but never losing grace. Long cloaks, hooded caps, fur-lined gloves. They might be cold, but nobles never shivered in public. They trained themselves to stand tall, to hold posture, to preserve appearance, even when all they wanted was to curl beside the fire like a cat. But the greatest difference was not in things. It was in the fact that they didn't have to do anything. No hauling water, no lighting fires, no stepping into the wind just to relieve themselves. Each small task, when stacked through a winter, became a matter of survival. And someone else always did them. If a noble caught a chill, there was a physician. A clean bed, fresh blankets, warm broth and hands to care for them. Every class had its own way to keep warm. For commoners, it was each other's body heat. For nobles, it was distance from the outside world. A castle might be cold, but it was never damp. A winter meal might be simple, but it was never empty. And when night fell, they heard the wind whistle against the stained glass windows, not with dread, but with comfort. Still, cold spared no one. In harsh winters, frost formed on castle walls, floors grew slick, nobles still fell ill, fires still burned out, but they had buffers, material and social, to carry them through. And when they didn't survive, their deaths were recorded, mourned, and carved into stone. While a peasant's passing was a breath lost in the night, a name forgotten before morning. Winter, then, was never a fair enemy. It visited every roof, but how we withstood it shaped the ending. And in the medieval world, the gap between a castle and a cottage was not just stone or straw. It was the right to live without straining every hour to stay warm. Could you survive a winter in a castle? Perhaps. But you would not understand the true worth of warmth until you had once shivered in a mud-walled home, with cow dung sealing the cracks and a dying fire buried beneath cold ash. In medieval society, cold was more than just weather. It was a test. And not everyone had the right to complain. If you were a peasant, one of the lower class, then endurance wasn't a choice. It was a duty, a virtue, a given, like the frozen air you had to breathe each morning. From childhood, you were taught that winter was the time to prove your resilience, not because someone would praise you or because there was a reward, but because if you stopped, if you complained, you wouldn't survive. And if you complained too loudly, you'd be seen as weak, as lacking in moral fiber. Monks, the ones who wrote and preached, often described the poor as models of humility and patience. In old manuscripts, they praised the one who suffered the cold in silence, who accepted hunger without revolt, who died in poverty but rich in faith. Cold, in this view, became sanctified, a moral lesson, and enduring it was woven into spiritual life. God tests those he loves, the phrase echoed from pulpits. If you shivered without a fire, you were reminded that Christ suffered too. If you wore rags, you were told of St. Francis, who embraced poverty to be worthy of heaven. But the upper class wasn't held to the same standard. They could be warm, wear furs, sip hot broth, and no one asked them to sacrifice it in the name of purification. When a nobleman caught a chill, he was treated as someone of value. When a peasant collapsed with fever, he was buried behind the church, without a name, without a coffin. The law reflected this, openly. Taxes, duties, food quotas, none of them eased in winter. In fact, the season often brought backlogs, late harvests, scarce supplies, obligations to deliver wood or grain. Villagers rose early, trekked through snow, hauled heavy sacks to the Lord's storehouse, only to receive a cold nod. And if you refused? If your body could no longer carry the weight? There were laws for that, too. Fines, forced labor, beatings. No one cared if your child had a fever, if your feet were purple from cold. Endurance was assumed. You were born to carry the weight of society. In small villages, unspoken rules ruled who was tough, who complained too much, who was a burden. Reputation spread fast. If you were seen as too soft, your neighbors looked at you with pity and disappointment. No one wanted to carry someone who wouldn't try, and you weren't the only one expected to bear it. Women, as mothers, as wives, were taught that keeping the home warm was their task. Even without enough firewood, even when the ashes had cooled, they were expected to keep the flame alive, with straw, with potato peels, with whatever they could find. And if a child caught cold? The mother was blamed for not making do well enough. So, was there hope? Yes. In the smallest cracks of this imposed system, people still found each other. They shared firewood, loaned coats, took turns staying up to watch the fire. But even those acts weren't enough to undo the expectation that you must endure the cold. Not just survive, but survive in silence, grateful to still be breathing. There were whispered stories of those who dared resist. A farmer who shut his door and refused to give up his firewood. A mother who begged to reduce her taxes because her child was sick. They weren't recorded. No history books speak their names. But around the hearths of small homes, sometimes, their names were whispered, unofficial heroes of another kind. And so, the cold of winter didn't just seep into the skin, it soaked into the mind. You weren't just fighting temperature, you were resisting expectation, pushing back against a system that turned suffering into virtue and called pain a test. You survived, but were not allowed to cry out. You were hungry, but not allowed to ask. You were shivering, but not allowed to curl in. And strangely, it was in that silence that people learned to love each other more deeply. Not with words, but with a potato quietly left behind, a log split in half, a coat placed at someone's door, with no name attached. Society may have demanded your suffering, but people quietly saved one another, bit by bit. That's how winter passed, not by law, but by kindness. Same winter, same England, same bitter wind that slices through flesh. And yet your meal, if you are a peasant, is nothing like the one being served upstairs, behind thick wooden doors and a roaring fire. You look down into your thin bowl of gruel. Gray, studded with half-swollen oats. A pinch of salt, if you're lucky that day. Sometimes your wife slices in a few bits of turnip, the kind hardy enough to survive beneath snow. No meat, no fat. Each spoonful is meant only to keep you upright and warm the hunger twisting in your gut. Meanwhile, at the Lord's manor, a whole pig turns slowly over an open flame. Its scent drifts all the way down the halls. Wine glimmers in silver goblets, dark and rich like blood in the firelight. Smoked meats, sausages, sourdough loaves, aged cheese, a feast that treats winter not as hardship, but as an excuse to indulge. You can smell it sometimes, passing the castle gates, or if you're hired to help in the kitchen. That thick scent of dripping fat. Spices from the east, cloves, nutmeg, black pepper, luxuries you can't even name. In the village, people trade recipes for gruel made from turnip peels and husks. An old woman once told you about stone soup, boiling water with a few stones to trick the children into thinking there's something in the pot. You laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Meanwhile, the nobility do not just eat to be full, they eat for pleasure. Every meal is a ritual, hands washed in rosewater, towels warmed, silverware polished like altar pieces. They eat slowly, telling stories as they chew, while you get only minutes beside the cold hearth to swallow quickly before work begins again. Their food comes from a stocked storeroom, stone-walled, layered with straw and ice. Wine is kept in cellars beneath the ground. You, on the other hand, have only a wooden box against the wall, where mice scurry and turnips mold when the frost sinks in. Not every noble is heartless. Some hand out food on holy days, cook great pots of soup for the poor. But even that comes with conditions. You must kneel, you must thank them, you must acknowledge their generosity. You are hungry and expected to be grateful for their leftovers. Winter is when class becomes clearest. When the ground freezes, no one plants. But while you watch your potatoes disappear, they still feast on last year's salted pork, imported French wine, salmon cured in ice jars. Food is not only calories, it is identity. Nobles eat meat not out of need, but to declare their place. Every slice lifted to their mouth is a reminder. I am not like you. While you must ask permission to take a turnip from the village storehouse, they are served pigeon pie in bed as a late-night snack. You once heard a tale of a winter feast at a nearby castle. 4 kinds of fowl, 2 soups, sweets stuffed with eastern nuts, mead distilled to gold. The man who told it, a hired cook, spoke with a hollow voice. They eat like they don't know what cold is. And you? Your evening meal is 1 handful of gruel, a single onion. Your child asks for more. You look at them and don't say, "There's none left." You say, "Tomorrow I'll trade wood for a bit of flour." But the wood is wet, and everyone keeps theirs close. You dream of meat. But what you truly crave is not having to worry over every bite, to eat without counting, to eat without wearing your coat indoors just to keep from trembling. At winter's end, when all reserves are gone, you begin to eat what once you would have thrown away. Grass, bark, wild mushrooms, risking poison. Some years, the whole village lives off soup made from husks and dried pods even animals refuse. But no one dies from fullness. Food, what should be the most basic thing, becomes a measure of status. Hunger is not just an empty stomach. It's the quiet certainty that you are not considered worthy of feeling full. Spring will come. You hope so. But by then, how many will still be strong enough to sow? Meanwhile, the castle windows still glow. Smoke still rises, steady, fragrant. And you wonder, how can the same winter contain 2 worlds so far apart? Only one thing is the same. Both eat in silence, but one eats to survive, the other to savor. Peasants of winter did not leave diaries. They wrote no letters. There was no pen, no paper, no time to record those days of hunger, cold, and quiet survival. But someone did write for them, from afar, from monasteries, from travels, from the warm drawing rooms of stone castles, those who did not live the cold, but stood just near enough to see it. A monk at the monastery of Northumbria once wrote, in the middle of the 14th century, "In the nearby village, children are blue with cold. Their parents cover them in dry straw, layer by layer, but the chill seems to rise from within. The slanted lines copied onto sheepskin still survive in books today." He seemed to feel pity. He seemed helpless. But he did not go outside. He only looked through stained glass and sighed. Travelers who passed through winter villages chose words like harsh, barren, or gloomy. A French nobleman, passing through Yorkshire in 1372, wrote, "Low houses, smoke curling from the roof, the scent of dung and thin soup clinging to the cold air. I did not stay long. They saw, they smelled, they remembered, but they did not stay." Clergy wrote in greater detail, some with compassion. A Benedictine monk described handing out bread and warm water to the poor every Saturday in winter. But he also added, "We do not let them into the chapel during Mass. Their smell is too strong." An invisible line between charity and distance. Nobles recorded winter with a kind of awe. How do they still live? They treated peasant endurance like a feat of nature, but never thought to share more. A lady in Kent wrote to her sister, "I told the servant to give away my old woolen cloaks, but I'm not sure they're truly grateful. They look like the earth itself." The distance was sharpest in how death was described. One chronicle from the time of Edward III listed bodies buried hastily due to cold and illness, but no names, no faces, just numbers in the margins, as if winter were a season when the earth simply swallowed the poor. And yet, a few voices came closer. Some folk healers, traveling from village to village, left notes about the nights they spent in peasant homes. One wrote, "I slept near the hearth, between 2 shivering children. The stink clung to my clothes for days, but their eyes, those eyes that still fought to live, I cannot forget. A few knights, grown old, wrote down memories from their youth, wandering the countryside in winter. One recalled, I once stopped at a peasant's home to ask for water. The woman said nothing, just poured it into a bowl. Her hands were cracked like bark. And he admitted, I never thought to ask her name. The records exist, but they are truth seen from afar, from behind frosted glass, from horseback at full gallop, from pages dried of ink before they could fully understand. The cold of the peasant became raw material for sermons, for poems, for lectures, but rarely for action. A famous medieval poet once wrote, Winter night is the cloak by which God tests the patience of the lowly. Beautiful lines. But while the peasant bit down to stop from trembling, the poet sipped honeyed wine beside a stone hearth. The distance was not just of class. It was the abstraction of suffering, when hunger and cold became symbols instead of realities. When people saw hardship, but not the person inside it. And so, centuries later, as you read these records, you see a warped painting. There is pity, but not enough to change anything. There is description, but not enough to understand. There is sorrow, but not enough to remember any names. That woman, that mother, that child, that old man. They appear only as shadows behind the page. But they truly lived, truly shivered, and truly kept silent, with no one to write for them, except for a few scattered lines, distant notes, like faint echoes in the middle of winter. And now only you remain, sitting with their words, quiet, as if listening from the other side of the frost. You survived a medieval winter night, a long, cracked, colorless night, filled with phlegmy coughs, wheezing breaths in the dark, and the quiet shuffles of someone searching for the last scraps of warmth buried in damp straw. You could feel every draft slipping through rotting wooden walls, every sudden shiver of the child beside you, every tightening of your own empty stomach. But by now, you were used to enduring. And then, morning. Not a clear, glorious morning, but a pale wash of light, as if the sun could barely be bothered, peeking weakly through thick clouds. But to you, it meant everything. It meant you were still breathing, still hearing a rooster crow in the distance, still able to lift your body out of the muddy nest of straw. No one marks that as a victory. No bells, no anthem, just another day to begin, another fire to tend, another bucket to fill, another crust of bread to chew, another task to get through. But you know, if you hadn't made it through the night, there would be no today. And maybe you're not even sure you wanted today. Surviving sometimes feels heavier than surrendering, but you still do it, as countless peasants did before. No one remembers their names, no statues are raised, but if they hadn't endured, there would be no world for you to live in now. And then you wake, or realize you never really left. You're in your own bed. The mattress is soft, full. The blanket is freshly laundered. There's no ash, no smoke, no coughing, no drafts slipping in through the walls. Only the quiet hum of a heater, or the steady turning of a fan. Maybe you're hugging a warm pillow. Maybe there's a cat curled at your feet. You're not hungry. You're not cold. You can stretch your legs without touching someone else's. You can take a deep breath without fearing mold or rot or the scent of poverty pressed into cloth. You came back. The question now is, would you go back again? Not out of curiosity, but to truly live one more night in the body of that nameless woman, in that frozen house, with the children, the husband, the dog, the lice, and the atali pot that still hasn't run dry. Maybe you learned something about the quiet of perseverance, the worth of a single breath, the kind of strength that never needs a name. Or maybe you just feel tired, cold, aching. You might shake your head. No, thank you. One night is enough. And that wouldn't be wrong. We are not made to suffer forever. Not everyone needs to be broken open to understand something. You imagined. You followed me through ragged rooms, through flavorless meals, through dirty layers of clothing, and the stray, misplaced laughter that echoes in the dark. That's enough. You don't need to go back. But somewhere out there, someone is still shivering, in colder places, in rooms with no heat, in corners of the world where surviving a single night is still something worth remembering. And not everyone gets remembered. If you take anything with you from this journey, let it be gentleness. Gentleness for weakness, for weariness, for yourself, and for others. Because not everyone sleeps in a warm bed. Not everyone knows peace. And sometimes, just a blanket, a bowl of porridge, a look of quiet understanding, is a way to say, I see you. I remember you. I know you survived. And so, the night closes. Not with thunder, but with a small warmth resting in your chest. A silent thank you. A nod, though no one is watching. You survived. But next time, if you can, live for the ones who didn't. And now, you may sleep. You made it. A full night in the skin of someone long forgotten. A woman with no name. A fire with no warmth. A bed of straw that never stopped itching. You heard the coughing. You smelled the smoke. You felt the weight of silence settle into the bones. And now, you're back. Back in your bed. Clean sheets. No rats. No prayers for warmth that never comes. Just stillness. And breath. And maybe rest. Not everyone gets that. Not now. Not then. So if you're still awake, thank you for staying. And if you're already asleep, well, that's kind of the point. This has been another quiet night of boring history for sleep. One more strange, soft journey through history to fall asleep to. From one sleepy historian to another. And if it brought you even a moment of peace, consider joining us again by subscribing to History for Sleeping. Until next time, stay warm, stay curious, and sleep well.